Hey guys, my name is Andrew Bauman. I am a therapist and an author, and I am so glad to be with you, talk about a very important topic that is near and dear to my heart. Try to get this all set up. Pornography. How many are excited to talk about pornography? It's not something that we enjoy talking about. It's normally remains hidden. It's a secret. I know that was a story for me in my life for 13 years. I hid my pornography addiction. I was growing up kind of in that sweet spot of purity culture, um, and also internet pornography becoming a thing. And so the church told me to be quiet about sex, to be ashamed for my desire for sex. And then pornography taught me that sex was to be devoured and not honored, that it was cheap, that it was selfish about my pleasure, rather than mutuality. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about it. So the title of this talk is called Pornocracy: Power, Politics, and Patriarchy. So loaded words, and yet I think you guys are going to get a lot out of this, and hopefully this will help you guys engage your own church communities, your own communities around this topic of pornography. So in 2014, Barna launched a study called the Porn Phenomenon, and they found that 57% of pastors and 64% of youth pastors had admitted to struggle with porn in the current or in the past. 57%. That's wild, right? If you look around the room that you're in currently, the pastors that are here, half of you, more than half. And that's, again, just the ones that admitted to the survey. 56% of women, 56% of women under the age of 25 seek out pornographic material. 81% of teen and young adult men seek it out. Isn't that wild? So this is an epidemic, right? This is huge. This has invaded our most sacred spaces. 79% between the ages of 18 and 30 view pornography at least monthly. This is wild. The pornification of our society and our church is huge and has impacted us in ways that we rarely admit. I want you to talk about it amongst your tables. If you want to hit pause on this video, how has it impacted you? How has it impacted your own life, your own story, your own church community? Try to be vulnerable, right? We got to begin to bring this out of the secret, out of the dark. And we need to talk about this. All right. Press pause. If not, we're going to continue. So how has this impacted us? Number one, get your pen out, your pencil, write this down. Porn has created an unconscious misogyny. Okay, what does the word misogyny mean? It means a dislike for or a contempt, an ingrained prejudice against women, right? So porn has created an unconscious misogyny towards women. Pamela Paul wrote in her book, From Pornography to Porno to Porn, How Porn Became the Norm. She wrote, countless men have described to me how while using pornography, they have lost the ability to relate to or to be close to women. They found the way they looked at a woman in real life warping to the pornographic fantasies they consumed on screen. Their daily interactions with women became pornified. Their relationships soured. They had trouble relating to women as individual human beings. Their relationship soured. They had trouble relating to human beings. They worried about the way they saw their daughters and girls, their daughters' age. That is huge, right? So why does porn lead to misogyny? This is what I call the pornographic style of relating. When pornography becomes your primary teacher or your guide in your sexual development, you learn certain ways of being. a pornographic style of relating. And we relate to women like we relate to the porn that taught us how to be sexual. So I know for me at age 13, right, my parents split up. Nobody's talking about sex. My church is talking about it in a very shallow way. They basically say, don't have sex until you're married. Porn, bad. That's basically the extent of the conversation, right? And so I am an innocent, curious little boy, and the internet becomes a thing, and I begin to seek out, well, what do breasts look like, right? What is sex? Because no one's talking about it, and yet I know it's a thing, and yet I don't know what it's about. And so it early on becomes just this act of curiosity, and slowly begins to grab me, capture me, and later on, which I'll talk about, actually imprisons me and nearly leads to my own death, which again seems a bit dramatic, and yet it's true. So this leads to a PSR, a pornographic style of relating, right? And so we begin to internalize this view of women. We begin to relate this way, right? And we don't know what to do with it. So now let's take this into pastors. So if 56% of pastors have some type of relationship with porn, how do you think they're going to engage women? Right? Unconsciously. How are they going to engage women? And again, I was a pastor. I was a pastor for years, and I had a secret addiction to pornography, right? It changes the way we relate to women. So it can happen a few ways. One, you can be really stringent on lessons about modesty, right? You're going to make it about somebody else, not you. You're going to push out the shame that you feel, and you're going to project that shame onto the women in your congregation. Again, it doesn't mean that you're bad guy. It just, this is what we do. This is what we see. This is what I work with all the time in the churches that I work with. We don't want women close because then they remind us of our shame, right? We want to push them out, or we want to leave the door open. We don't want to meet with them in private, right? And somehow we make it that they're dangerous when really we know that we are dangerous because of our own secrets, right? So a pornographic style of relating. When you yourself are masturbating to images, there's no one else to satisfy, no one else to consider. You get to control the entire scene, right? The setup, the romance, the rituals, the climax are all in your power. This creates an innate selfishness and an unconscious desire for control over your intimate relationships, absolute control, right? And all of a sudden, then you're told to be in a real relationship. That's not how it works. With a real woman who has real desires, or real longings, real needs, you have to consider another person, right? So this is where porn, and I'll talk about later, the pornocracy, right? Going into our society, democracy. But porn infiltrates our marriages and our relationships, and we no longer know how to have healthy sexuality, right? We no longer are able to process this because porn has become so inundated, and we've grown to have a pornographic mindset, right? This is the inner world of an addict, right? My frustrations of not being able to have healthy relationships then get projected onto women. The projection comes out in forms of contempt, dislike, and misogyny. And I have found, especially in Christians, because we bear so much shame, that our shame is then projected outward into hatred or disdain for women. So how has the pornification of society impacted us? All right, impacted us. Number two. So the first one was this created unconscious misogyny. Number two, how has the pornification of society impacted us? It has created a culture of systemic patriarchy. Excuse me. So before you dismiss that word as some, liberal trope, patriarchy is a real deal. All right. It's not about politics. A systemic patriarchy is a system or a government which hold men which men hold the power, and women are excluded from it. All right. Women are excluded from it. Ryan Burns, in his book, Male Internet Pornography Consumers, wrote, a study looking at heterosexual men who use pornography found that the more pornography the man consumed, the more likely he was to describe women in a sexualized, stereotypical feminine ways, to approve of women in traditional female occupations, and to value women who are more submissive and subordinate than men, right? So if 80% of our men are looking at porn, roughly, 56% of our pastors, this type of submissive, subordinate, women are less than, are getting into our bodies. It's getting into how we lead our congregations, how we lead our government. Women are less than, even if we don't want to say it out loud, right? We don't want to say it out loud because we know it's inappropriate, and yet it comes out in how we live, right? Just a few years ago, if you look at some of the statistics just in our government, 19% only of women were in the House of Representatives, 21% in the Senate, right? Look at the sexist comments of our past presidents, right? This is liberal and conservative, right? This is everywhere. This patriarchy crosses political lines. And church leadership, right, is even worse. When you look at 60%, 61% of our churches are typically female and only 39% male, you have about 10% women in any type of leadership, right? My survey of over 2,800 women who worked in churches, in Protestant churches, 81% believed that sexism played a role in their church, right? 62% of those women who worked in church said they would not be surprised if they heard a sexist joke, right? About women drivers, women in the kitchen, that sort of thing. That's the stuff I grew up with, basically saying women are less than, and we don't need to get into deep theological debates about women in leadership. That's just not the proper place. But my argument, what I'm saying is that porn has gotten so deep into us. We view women less than, we view them differently, we engage them differently, right? A few years ago, this hashtag on Twitter began trending, things that only Christian women hear. Number one, Charlie wrote, you can teach the women and children, you just can't teach the men. Number two, you're an amazing leader. You make an excellent pastor's wife someday. Number three, women are too emotional to be leaders. It would just never work. Next one, women can write theology books, but can't teach theology. She can't lead worship because no one sings when women are lead singers. Just be the backup, that's fine. Biblical womanhood can be defined by marriage and motherhood. Even a few years ago, a local Seattle pastor calling women penis homes. Right? Do you hear the degradation? Do you hear the slowly cutting down? And yet women are made in the image of God, the Imago Dei. How do we honor and not devour? How do we not degrade, dehumanize, right? And this is where pornography has so inundated us. I don't even think we know what we're doing. And yet it's become the norm in society, in the church. And I truly believe the church has to blaze a different type of trail. I truly believe the church has to be leaders in this movement to honor women. So number three, how has porn impacted us? Number three, pornography has normalized sexual abuse and silenced a woman's experience. Let me say that again. Number three, pornography has normalized sexual abuse and silenced a woman's experience. 1 in 3 women experience sexual or physical violence, most likely from their intimate partner. That's from the World Health Organization. 1 in 3. In a study looking at women who were victims of domestic violence, among those who have been raped, 73% stated their partners had used pornography. All right. Mary Ann Layden wrote This is how pornography works. You need more and more to get the same rush. So you do riskier and riskier behaviors, right? This is what's happening. This is what happens in our brain to get a dopamine hit. It becomes darker and darker, riskier behaviors, and sexualization, the abuse of women becomes normalized. And we have to do something. So what do we do? What do we do to fix this? It can feel so big, right? What do we do to fix it? Number one, this is important. This is the meat of my talk. Number one, what do? We have to first know our own story, right? Have you told the truth about your own life, your own sexuality, versus minimizing your own darkness, your own brokenness, your own levels of addiction? What is your story of your sexuality? When were you first exposed to porn? These are things you got to be talking about. You have to first know your own story. First know your own story. Open it up. What we are secret about is normally where our shame lies, right? So where are your secrets, right? What are you silent about? If you're not talking about pornography, if you're not talking about sexuality in your church, why? Let's be curious. I'm not interested in judging you. I'm interested in being curious of why. Why the silence? So number one, how do we fix this? We got to know our own story. Number two, we've got to own our own sin and our own sexual brokenness, right? We must own our own internalized misogyny and patriarchy, right? 1 Timothy 1:15, to transform these heartbreaking cultural norms as Christians, we must lead with our brokenness, just as Paul demonstrates, right? 1 Timothy 1:15, Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners who I am the worst. We got it. This is what we got. This is our new posture, right? It's leading with a limp. It's leading with our own brokenness, right? This happened to me probably about 10 years ago. I'm leading an addiction workshop. Okay, it's probably 30 people in the crowd. I'm facilitating it. Somebody raised their hand and they say, well, Andrew, how did you get into this addiction work? And I said, well, because of my 13-year addiction to pornography. And I froze. I had never publicly admitted that. I had only started admitting that to myself, to my own therapist, right? Beginning to deal with my own sexual brokenness and my own shame of objectifying women for so long. And I just admitted it out loud, right? I was terrified. I wanted to grab the words back. I couldn't. So I was like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? And I looked at the people's faces. They did not have the same amount of disgust towards me that I had towards myself. So they were leaning forward. Their faces were soft, right? So I continued to go. I told part of my story of kind of what led. And that was the beginning of me 10 years ago talking about pornography publicly, beginning to write about it. Now I've written 2 books about the subject, right? Like, this is a big deal. We have to own our own sin, lead from our place of sexual brokenness. This is how people can trust us. This new generation coming up is drawn to authenticity, and that's it, right? They've seen too much. They've seen too much abuse of power. They've seen too much misogyny masquerading as theological truth, right? Number 3, what do we do? What do we do? We have to tell our own stories. Speak up, right? Tell your own story, despite the darkness of your stories. God is truth. And the more we live in truth, the more we experience God. I'm going to say that again. The more we live in truth, the more we tell our truth, because God is truth, is the more we experience God. Men, we have to make peace with our shame. If you've been abusive, if you've been a part of this systemic oppression, who has silenced part of God's image, we have to make peace with our shame. Women, make peace with your self-contempt. It's not your fault. It's not your body's fault, right? We have to enter into our bodies. We have to do this hard work, right? And become liberated and use our stories for the liberation of others, right? Because the evil one wants to steal, kill, and destroy you, John 10:10, right? But Christ has come to give us life and give it to the full. Finally, a couple more here. Number 4, what do? No more bystanders to sexism. No more bystanders. Crass joking about women in the kitchen, sexualizing them, locker room talk, being one of the guys. No more. We cannot be bystanders to this sexism, right? That includes in the church. I remember writing about this, writing about this. This is probably a couple years ago, and I'm walking down the street in Seattle, where we used to live, and all of a sudden I hear this guy whistling to this girl down the street. It's like a cat call. And I literally had just written about no more being bystander to sexism. And I was like, man, I gotta say something. I don't want to say something, right? I was like, I can't be a hypocrite with my work. And so I just kind of mustered some courage and I said, dude, she's a human. Don't treat her that way. Something like that. It wasn't not articulate by any means, but I said something. In that moment, I interrupted sexism. He turned to me and he started cussing me out, and I just kept walking. Right. That was the end of the engagement. It was nothing profound. And yet I can be proud of myself that at that moment, I was not a bystander to this man's sexist engagement to this woman. Right. Do not treat her that way. She's not a piece of meat. She is not there for you to devour and objectify and take from. Her beauty is not to be devoured. Right. Number 5, what we must do, we must build a comprehensive sex positive ethic, right? No more can we let shame guide our sexuality. No more can we let our youth be mentored by pornography, right? By sexist advertising. We have to start talking about it. We're not going to talk about it to our kids until we make peace with it within ourselves. Right? We cannot let shame silence our voice. We have to tell our stories of our sexuality and begin to be loud. And again, not loud in a negative sense. We just need to begin to talk about it, open ourselves up to it. I know that's what I'm going to be doing on my platforms. My hope is that you join me, right? That we no longer let pornocracy, porn, invade us, invade our churches, invade our society, but we step up, we intercept, and we begin to build these positive engagements around sexuality and reclaim what has been stolen. Thank you guys so much for having me. Such an honor to be with you. I hope you guys can talk about this amongst yourselves and begin to engage us in a much deeper way. Thank you. Peace.